Hey guys, and welcome back to yet another episode. On the show today, we're finally going to be taking a look at Pit Fighter, a personal favorite of mine and a very divisive game in general. As you guys already know, I do own the arcade board for this one, but today we're going to look at what is, in my opinion, the only good home version on the Sega Genesis, brought to us by Tengen in 1991. I think Pit Fighter gets a bad rap a lot of the time thanks to how terrible most of the home versions were back at the time. I mean, seriously, I can't think of another arcade game that's had so many bad ports. It's really kind of crazy to think about. For example, the Super NES port is not only a bad one, but it's one of the worst games I've personally ever played. If we hop in the time machine and head on back to 1990 when the arcade game was released, you'll find that Pit Fighter was actually quite popular. Back then, this was a machine that was always crowded. Keep in mind that this was pre-Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat, so the digitized graphics and style looked super cool and new. The aesthetic was awesome and not like anything else out at the time. And man, when you had all three players going at the same time, it really was a sight to behold. But like the Highlander, there was one decent version of the game that came home to the Genesis in 1992. So what makes this port stand head and shoulders above the rest? Let's dive in and find out. To those of you guys not terribly familiar with Pit Fighter, it's a multiplayer fighting game that utilizes digitized actors and was one of the first to do it. You fight your way through as one of three characters, all with different attributes and moves, brawling your way through the seedy underbelly of the city, through the parking garages, subway stations, and high rises. It's a 3-button game originally, with a punch, kick, and jump buttons respectively, and this translates really well to the Genesis thanks to the controller's layout. You earn money by beating down opponents, and afterwards are shown the iconic cutscene of your fighter on a forklift being raised up by the amount of cash that you've earned so far. This was always super memorable for me, kind of like that horrifying Ninja Gaiden Continue screen from the arcade back in the day. I gotta say, Pit Fighter on the Genesis surprises you right from the start too, with the entire opening carried over from the arcade, complete with the cool opening movies for each character. Once you hop in, you can't help but notice that the game actually has life bars, like the arcade, instead of the dumb number thing they did with some of the other ports. Also, there's like no limit on how often you can use your special move, as it should be. Do you want to spam it to death? Just go right ahead and use it like you did in the arcade. That's how it was intended. The 3-player mode has obviously been trimmed back to 2 players, which is still great. All 3 of the arcade original characters are here, as well as all the enemies, weapons, backgrounds, and power pills. So graphically, right out of the gate, you can notice that this one has been cut back. The sprites still look good and pretty much like the original, but are much smaller here. Being that the arcade game zoomed in and out, the Genesis port basically keeps the camera at the farthest distance, which makes sense being that more screen is needed for 2-player games when all 4 characters are on screen at once. Crowd interaction is still there as well, with the yelling and taunting, and even the folks that like to step out from time to time to try to get a quick hit in. The sound includes just about all the voice from the arcade, and the music sounds better here than just about any other version out there. If you are a fan of the Pit Fighter soundtrack, the Genesis iteration may be right up your alley. Gameplay feels almost exactly the same as the arcade. As I had mentioned, the button layout feels natural thanks to the awesome Genesis controller. Keep in mind that I'm not saying here that Pit Fighter is a great game, it's not. This is just a really good port of an okay game with a lot of flaws. It's still lovable, but also retains all the frustration of the arcade too. Hit detection is still all over the place, sometimes you just can't move, and the AI is wildly inconsistent. Pit Fighter is an acquired taste. I feel like you kind of had to be there to appreciate what it brought to the table in its time. So many other games have kind of eclipsed it over the years, and its reputation of having some of the worst ports out there for any arcade game definitely doesn't help its legacy. I've always been a fan of the game, but that's because it was a game that I grew up with. This one is a regular in my arcade board rotation and holds a lot of nostalgia for me. Sure, it hasn't aged very well, and it may be ultra frustrating to play at times, but man, I can't help but love it. If not the arcade game, the Genesis cart is always my go-to version for playing on the couch. It's not expensive, and it's a lot of fun with a co-op partner. I'd recommend it to anyone who can take it with a grain of salt, which at this point in time is pretty necessary. As always, guys, I'd like to thank you all for watching, subscribing, and of course commenting, and until next time, stay classic.